All right, so good morning or good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our Women in STEM panel. I'm so glad everybody could be here today, even if it's virtually. Just a quick introduction. My name is Emily Green. I am the Mobile River Coordinator who works with the Colorado River Alliance. And just a reminder about who the Colorado River Alliance is, we champion the long-term vitality of the Texas-Colorado River through education and engagement. So we have a bunch of educational programs which work throughout the year to continue to engage our public and our community. All right, awesome. And just as a reminder, this is an installment of our River Reflections speaker series. Our next one will be available in October during our Lake Travis cleanup, and we'll be talking about pollution. So very exciting. Again, I'm so glad that all of y'all could be here today. We have a lot to discuss, and I'm super excited. So we can go ahead and start out with introductions, just go over who you are, what you do, your background, all that good stuff. So I'll go ahead and start with Dr. Madkins.
Hey everyone, I'm Tia Madkins. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Education at UT Austin. And my focus is on STEM education with attention to issues of equity in K-12 learning spaces.
All right, awesome, thank you. All right, Vanessa Escobar, can you go ahead?
Sure, thanks for having me here today and allowing me to share your time. My name is Vanessa Escobar and I'm a native Texan, originally from Katy, and I've been working in the water resources, planning, and groundwater management field for about 15 years. And all of those have been in the public sector, mainly state and local government agencies. My current role right now is with the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District. That's a really long name. And I serve as a general manager. I've been there for about 7 years. And for those of you who don't know what a groundwater conservation district is, we're essentially a governing authority that's set up to manage and regulate groundwater production from the aquifers across the state. And so the Barton Springs Edwards Aquifer Conservation District is a very small district that manages essentially the Edwards and Trinity aquifers right here in the Austin, Hays County areas. And I'll just kind of end by saying that I really like to describe my job as kind of working within the nexus of water conservation and water law and regulatory compliance and field science. So it's a nice fun blend of different things.
Awesome, thank you so much for that. All right, Stephanie Moore, you're up.
Okay, my name is Stephanie Moore. I am a hydrologist. I'm also a professional geoscientist. And I work for a consulting firm called Dana B. Stevens and Associates. We're here in Austin, Texas. I was born here in Austin, but spent about 15 years of my life in New Mexico, and that's where DBSNA is based. And recently moved back here to Austin about 3 years ago. So we work with all kinds of people, whether they're public, private, and help them solve water issues, whether that's water quality or water supply or remediation, that sort of thing.
Thank you. All right, thanks everybody for those introductions. I appreciate it. Also, something that I forgot to mention at the top of this presentation is that if you do have any questions, please feel free to put them in the comments section on the Facebook live stream. We will be answering those towards the end of our panel. So we'll go ahead and start out with some discussion questions and then move on to audience questions at the end. Okay, all right, so first question. What made you first want to get into your STEM field? And I'll start with Vanessa on this one.
Sure. So, I was thinking about that the other day. To be honest, I think it was a few simple things. Growing up, I had a single parent and we didn't really get to take a lot of fancy vacations. So most of our vacations were to state parks around Texas. And so I just fondly and vividly remember visiting the state parks and camping and exploring the natural landscapes and just really coming to understand that as being associated with science. And, at the same time, throughout my childhood, my mother would purchase a lot of like magazines, like Science Magazine or National Geographic would get delivered to our house. And to be honest, I always kind of envisioned myself becoming a wildlife photographer who would go work for National Geographic, and that I would be a scientist who just trekked around the world and got to be in the outdoors. So that was like my goal as a young kid. But from there, it kind of stuck with me. Just the excitement and the interest of being outdoors and the connection to nature is probably what kind of sparked my interest in the science field to begin with.
That's so funny you said that, because that was my goal as a kid as well. We used to be National Geographic, and I was like, I'm gonna do this one day.
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, absolutely. All right. Stephanie, can you go ahead and tell us how you got your start in your STEM field?
It's really similar. It's funny that you say National Geographic. We have stacks of those out in the living room right now. I totally looked forward to reading that magazine. And you know, I'm also from Texas, from Austin here, and kind of the same thing. We didn't have a lot. We didn't go on big fancy vacations. We went to rivers and creeks and deserts and all over the state, and it was just interesting. And you know, I guess even though it is kind of stereotypical that it's not for girls, nobody ever told me that I didn't get that memo, and so I thought it was cool, and you know, I just did it. It's so fascinating. There's so many things about nature that are amazing and mysterious. And, you know, trips to Balmaria Springs, like driving across West Texas. It's West Texas. You're in the middle of this huge desert, and then you get out there, and especially in the summer, oh, it was such a delight to go swim in that. You know, it was amazing. Like, where does this water come from? And I just wanted to know, and asked a lot of questions and kept doing that.
Yeah, definitely. I feel that the visiting state parks is definitely an underlying theme here. I think that's super essential for everyone to get out, especially as a kid, and have that established at a young age. Right. Dr. Madkins, what about you?
We grew up in Houston and in Atlanta, and I have a huge family, and I was always really, really curious. And when I was probably in second or third grade, I really wanted to be a lawyer. And my dad always said I was really good at crafting an argument, because I was one of the older girls. And so I was really good at trying to figure out how to get what I wanted. And so I tried to channel that energy, though, into thinking about figuring things out and being curious. And so science for me wasn't really a thing in elementary school. It wasn't really taught. It was one of the things that you did as a special, so to speak. So if you finished your work early, you got to go in the hall and mess around with a few things. And so that was always really interesting to me. I was one of those kids who was sent out into the hallway to do those kinds of things, but over time really developed a love for baking and for fashion and for beauty, and was always really interested in how those things came to be. Like, what's the chemistry of cooking, what goes into the products that we use for skincare, for makeup. And so I ended up, and I was always interested in medicine. So I was pre-med and a bio major as an undergrad, but was never really, I've never been a competitive person. So med school ended up not being for me. And so I decided to pursue, I always wanted to be a teacher. I love working with little ones. And I love everything about STEM. And so combining those two really worked out well for me. I just want to say welcome to everybody who's just joining us on Facebook Live. And thank you for your time today. Thanks for having all of us.
I'm so glad that everybody could make it and share their stories and kind of further the conversation about women in STEM. I feel like it's very important that we continue that conversation. Well, thank you guys. Okay, so let's move on to our second question. Did you ever have a role model who inspired you to be involved in STEM? Was there a teacher, professor, parent, anyone who maybe encouraged you or told you don't stop, continue what you're doing? And Vanessa, I'll start with you.
Sure. So I guess growing up, STEM wasn't really a term of focus, in my school or in my family. I think that kind of says how old I am, but really, my mother, again, I think because she was the oldest of 8, she kind of came from a part of the state where she had to work really hard. She was from the Valley, and raising us, the 2 girls, I think it was really her mission to make sure that we kind of progressed a little further than she was able to. And so she really pushed us to make sure that we were going to go to college. Like there was no option. That's just what you did in life. And so that's what our plan was from a young age. And I think she really had an appreciation for science and engineering. And so she kind of guided us a little bit towards that without us really even knowing it. But again, I didn't really have access to any direct role models who were scientists themselves. That just wasn't a part of my world or my family. But I did come from a family of educators. Like everyone from the Valley, at least, who did make it to college ended up becoming an educator of some sort. And so just that value for education really set the expectation high for my generation, my cousins and my siblings. And so really, I think it's really important to recognize that the underlying kind of thread that you probably find in a lot of scientists and engineers is that curiosity and the questions that people want to seek to answer. And so that really kind of inspired me to just do as best I could in my academics and find a place, where I can match my interests with work.
Yeah, absolutely. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, definitely. Okay. Dr. Madkins, what about you?
Hope you all can hear me okay. The rain has started and it's pounding down on the house. So yeah, lots of role models along the way. I have to definitely say my parents, my wonderful mother was really good at explaining things. And as probably as annoyed as she was as having so many girls asking her questions all the time, she was really good at explaining things. And so that for me was a model of how you actually engage in STEM, right? It's about explanations. And my daddy, who worked in construction, he was a contractor for over 50 years. There's so much STEM involved in that, and thinking about everyday ways of knowing and doing, we call it that, right? But there's so much I learned from him. Also, he grew up on a farm in East Texas. And so learning a lot about plants and just life as a young kid really inspired me. And then lots and lots of teachers along the way. All of my science teachers in middle school were actually great women. And then as an undergrad, I had two very important grad students who were pursuing their PhDs in chemistry. And I happened to have two Black women, which is so rare, especially at that time in the late 90s. And one of them was the TA for my organic chemistry class. And once I went to her office hour, she actually would sit next to me and lecture and like re-explain everything that the lecturer was saying. And that was really helpful. And so that really inspired me, one, to be kind and to be gentle to those who are learning and maybe having difficulty, but also just that personal connection that's often missing that we see in the STEM fields.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good point that you made, that the personal connection is often missing. I've definitely experienced that before getting a STEM degree. There's a wide range of professors that you'll meet in role models for sure. Right, Stephanie?
Yeah, I had, my parents were great, and they, kind of like Vanessa said, they just expected me to do well and go to college. That was just what you were supposed to do. And my dad was a doctor, my aunt was a rocket scientist. So I had that ability, and my mom just, reinforced that you can do whatever it is that you want to do. It doesn't matter if it's mostly boys in science, or if it's and then back to the National Geographics and just common, press, the Scientific American, we talked about all of those things and study, people like Jane Goodall and Mae Jemison, and just people like that were in the news. And it was very, very exciting stuff to see women going into space. Like that was, or a woman living alone studying animals and the wildlife. That was super exciting and inspiring. And it, it really made you think that you could do whatever you wanted to do. And then in school, definitely, it's funny. I think Dr. Madkins said it, that all of your teachers, all of your science teachers were women. And I think that's probably true for me. I'm trying to go through all of them. I had one male physics teacher, but all the rest, a lot of them were women. And then in college, a lot of, seeing other women that were pursuing science and math. I wasn't the only person doing it. And then in my career, once I had, a real job, most of my mentors were actually men, but I didn't get any discouragement, direct discouragement. I just found ones that were willing to work with you and help me and support me and show, talk through things and help me do better. And one of those was my first job here in Texas, which was at the U.S. Geological Survey. And yeah, that was priceless. And actually, Tim Rainey, he's still the director of the USGS here, and he was one of my first bosses. And he told me, I had the most difficult reviews, right, getting my first publication. And he was like, it's okay, that this isn't the end, this is how we're going to deal with it. And this is how we're going to reply. And this is how we're going to be professional and fix it and get it published. And that's my first publication. So a whole variety of people along the way. And all of those add up together, I think, for everybody, to help you every step of the way.
Definitely. And people who continue encouragement as well, and not, dispel any sort of the issues that you might have or anything like that. They work with you. I think that's very important. Okay, let's see here. Oh, this is an important question. This is, of course, not to relive any trauma or anything like this, but I think it is important to have this discussion and share these experiences so that we can continue to amplify our voices as women in STEM and continue to make that heard for other people. So what obstacles, especially from the perspective of being a woman, did you have to overcome to get into your field, and how did you get through it? So Dr. Madkins, I'll start with you.
Ooh, that's a big question. And I know we'll talk more about intersectionality in a moment. I think for me, it was never this idea of women and girls can't do it. I think among the panelists, we've kind of all said that we didn't get that message as much as the literature tells us it is out there, and it is. So it's not to say that it doesn't exist, but I think I'm very grateful, and I can definitely thank my parents for that. I was a Girl Scout until high school, and so we were always doing kinds of STEMmy things. And so I say all of those kinds of messages matter, right? And so the idea that if the message was there, I certainly didn't pick up on it. It wasn't something that stuck with me. And again, I think it goes back to having really good role models, people telling you that you can do it. And not only that, but showing you how. Breaking down just academia, breaking down freshman bio. I was given the great advice of splitting it up and taking part of it over the summer where I could more fully engage with it, because that first year schedule, as for those of you who are undergrads majoring in any of the STEM fields, it's a very intense first 2 years. And so doing that really helped me, but it also helped me to gain friendships with other young women who were also pursuing the degree. And so really strengthening those bonds turned out to be really critical for graduation. I think as far as getting through the PhD, that's its own thing. It was very, very difficult in lots of ways, but I had great mentoring. And so I think that does make a difference. I think having a mentor who understands who you are and sees your value and lets you speak your truth is really important. And so for me, that was one important factor in my success. Obviously, everyone has like their personal and professional networks that contribute to that. All through college and even into some of my professional life as an adult, I was a member of the National Society of Black Engineers. That's how I was offered actually most of the internships that I ended up pursuing as an undergrad, and lots of the resources that came along with that. So I'll stop there to let the other panelists talk.
That's an awesome perspective, though. I like hearing that, you had camaraderie as you, with not only your peers, but your professors, your mentors, everybody else. It's super, super important. Right. Stephanie.
Well, a lot along the lines of what Dr. Madkins just described. There's always obstacles to get into, going through college and matriculating and finding your own path. But I was thinking more along the lines of specifically like being a woman in my first job. My first job was with the US Geological Survey. And I guess one of the first things is you just have to be comfortable being one of the few women in a field with all men. And most of the, when I started with the US Geological Survey in 1997, I was in the Fort Worth sub-district office, and there were about 10 people there, and I was the only other woman there. Marilyn was the receptionist. She was awesome. But all of the other people were men. And we would go out into the field a lot. Sometimes we did stormwater sampling. And so that often it rains, and it's raining now. It's thundering outside very loudly, but it rains at inconvenient times in the middle of the night, and you're going out into all over Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex to collect rainwater samples, the first flush, and then going back to the lab and titrating alkalinity in the middle of the night. And it's, you're and it depends on how you're raised, right? But when you're in high school, typically you're taught you shouldn't be like the only girl hanging out with the guys, right? Like that's one of the messages that you're taught that might be a little dangerous. But then here you are in the middle of the night, alone working with a bunch of men, and all of the men, I have to say, no trauma stories. All of the people that I've worked with have been awesome and supportive, but it's still a different paradigm. And if we, especially growing up, if we tend to isolate or segregate, girl activities and boy activities, then if you want to go into a career where you're one of the few women in a male dominated field, then that might be a little uncomfortable. So that might take some getting used to. And then, throughout that, there's a lot of field work, a lot of times being alone in the field in very isolated areas in the middle of New Mexico or Texas, or other times, traveling with 5 other men for a week at a time, being in hotels and remote places, so that's unusual. And this might not be a PC thing to say, but, you go into the bathroom in the middle of nowhere. Like, how do you pee in the woods with a bunch of, whether it's in the woods or it's actually sometimes more difficult if you're in the desert because there are no trees to go behind. So, little things like that, just the practicalities of it, it's totally, you can deal with it. Anybody can. It's just a little maybe out of the ordinary, not your typical office job. And then other things that I think are still an issue for all women that choose to procreate is maternity leave, and how to raise children and have time off, and how to re-enter the workforce without damaging your career, that sort of thing. So, but they're all possible. They're obstacles, and everybody has obstacles, and it's things like this that can help us talk through them and work it out with one another. So.
Yeah, thank you for that. And the maternity leave is definitely something that I forget about because I just graduated college. I don't think about having kids anytime soon. So I think that's super important to remember going through the workplace. And Vanessa.
Sure. Well, I love hearing these stories of these gritty and ambitious women on the panel. I probably wouldn't describe myself as being so ambitious early on, as a kid graduating high school, first in my family to go to college. I don't know that I was necessarily prepared for what to expect and how to handle that transition. And to be honest, that was where some of my earliest challenges came in for me, because when I was at a big university, a state school, A&M, and doing that first year in the biology track, I wasn't really able to cut it and handle the bio and the chem and all the other, calculus classes at the same time. And, I felt a little isolated too, because at the time I didn't have a good network. I didn't have a support system. I didn't, wasn't part of the minority, groups that were established at the university. And so without support, I was quickly, going to probably have to leave the university. And so I did have one advisor who did, give me another chance and help me find a different route to follow in my path through college. And so I shifted my degree a little bit, and I went into bioenvironmental science instead of like the biology medical track. And so that was a big pivot for me, but it allowed me to continue and allowed myself to see my own potential. And so I was able to finish college, and it was hard. I had to repeat some classes. I had to drop some classes. It took me a little bit longer, and I certainly didn't graduate at the top of the class. But it was rigorous for me. And so part of the reason I didn't go on to pursue my master's was because I felt like I needed a break from college. But the other big factor for me was not really being able to afford it. It required a lot of loans and scholarships for me to get through just my undergrad. And I really couldn't see a way that I could afford to go on and advance myself at that time. And so I really couldn't afford to put the burden on my mother. We had my sister was just entering college. And so for me, I just kind of ventured out into the world and kind of happened into this field of water resources by accident. I really thought I was going to be doing like soil remediation or something. But someone took a chance on me, and fortunately, I think my Aggie network kind of helped. And so I was able to step into this field and just advance through it. But as far as obstacles, I'm not going to lie, there were definitely people, men, women, who could stand in the way of trying to help, young and upcoming women kind of make their way through this profession. But there were more people who were willing to help and guide and support. And so that makes all the difference in the world. And if we can return, that favor to the next generation, that's really our purpose. And so it's, I still experience challenges with kind of balancing things. I've moved around quite a bit in my career, and I have always wanted to go and get a master's, but I feel like life just happened to me. And if it wasn't a new job position that I took that was very demanding, or me having my second child to kind of throw me off, my track of getting a master's, somehow I've still managed to kind of succeed and get to a place where I'm still able to work, doing what I love, and still, make advancements and still learn. So.
Yeah, and like you said, the network support is really good, and wherever you are in your career, it's always good to feel supported and have that system in place, and have, like you said, for the next generation as well, to have that support system. I think that's essential, really. Okay, let's see. Our next question. So, of course, women in STEM is intersectional. You can't talk about women in STEM without including factors such as race, socioeconomic class, age, and so much more. So how do you think that we should create a more intersectional and accepting culture within the STEM community? And Stephanie, I'll start with you this time.
Wow. Programs like this are a great one tool in the toolbox. But it really, the next, I guess, few questions that we've already seen the questions, just to admit to the viewers, we know what the questions are, but these are all very related. And I think it starts from such a young age, from parents, and what we've heard everybody say so far today is their parents encouraged them. And but even beyond that, right now where we are, I really think that programs like this are a huge, huge benefit, because first we have to recognize all of these factors and talk about them, even though sometimes they're a little bit uncomfortable for some people to talk about. It's an important step along the way. And, if we don't recognize some of the issues that exist, then there's no way we can never fix them. So, I think, honest discussions, self-evaluation and self-reflection, which is really, it's not the easiest thing in the world, but it's better on the other side of once you get through that. So I think these sorts of programs are a great start, and just keeping up the discussion with all of our networks, and, age appropriately all the way down to our children.
Sorry, I had to put myself on mute there for a second. It's thundering like crazy. But yes, absolutely. I like that you mentioned from adults all the way down into our children. I think that's super important to have that idea of this is okay, this is acceptable to all age groups. I think it's very important. Right, Dr. Madkins, you're up next.
Well, this is an area of expertise for me. It's what I think about in my research in STEM education in particular. And intersectionality is thinking about intersecting identities, right? So that's one piece of it. And by that, we simply mean what it means to be Black, a girl, and maybe from a low income neighborhood or from a wealthy neighborhood, and the kinds of schooling experiences that you'll have. But it moves beyond that. So it's not just thinking about how those identities intersect, it's thinking about how they intersect with systems of oppression and power to further marginalize, right? So if we know that Black and brown kids in the US have particular schooling experiences, but you have to layer on thinking about how those experiences might be different for students who are boys versus girls, thinking about what middle class schooling experiences might look like and how those are different than students who experience schools that are not funded as well. And so if you think about that just here in Austin, it's thinking about a school on the east side, right, that's been shut down and combined with another school, and a school on the north side or on the south side, right, where real estate is booming. And so they're building lots of new things, right? And they're thinking about building new schools to support people who are moving into those communities who have the wealth to purchase a home, right? And where that area is not being gentrified the same way it is in East Austin. And so if we think about that, we have to think about how those are the experiences of those students, of those families, those individuals in those particular areas, right? And so if we think about that, we can also think about that in terms of STEM, right? It's easy for us to think about that with a child, right? It's an easy way to think about understanding the concept is what I mean. But when we think about what it means to be Black and a woman and a biology undergrad at a historically white institution, that's very different. And so thinking about how those experiences of those women are very different, and how there are particular supports, right? There are going to be obstacles that those individuals face that others will not. There are going to be ways that they experience the exact same class in very different ways. And so we need to be very mindful of that. We also need to be thinking about what we can do to support those students. For example, I have a colleague that I went to grad school with who was very deeply entrenched in this work in redesigning the Chem 101 course. And they specifically targeted students of color. In that course, they offered additional supports for them and also a very safe space where only they were allowed to be in that space. So they could talk about issues they were facing and not have to worry about censoring it in any way. Those are the kinds of things that we have to do if we really want STEM and the sciences in particular to be not only diverse, but inclusive and thinking about issues of equity. I'll stop there. There are other things, lots of other things I could say, and have to say, but I'll stop for a moment.
Yeah, I think that program that you mentioned is fantastic. I like, especially in university culture, I think sometimes it's just push on through, it's fine, everything's fine, this is the way the course is. And I like that y'all took the time
to people out.
Yeah, exactly. And really I like that you took the time to reevaluate and kind of take that time and say, how can we support our students rather than try to get them out of this field? And I think that's super important because I've definitely experienced that in culture before, where it's like, if you can't handle it, then you don't deserve to be here. And that's not the case. So yeah, very important. Right, Vanessa.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I firmly believe that there's still a lot of work to do in the STEM field as far as in providing for more diversity and inclusion. And I believe that our field is strengthened, by more diverse people and diverse perspectives. And, I've been reading up a lot on this subject recently, and I came across a report where it was about someone who organized a series of workshops for upcoming STEM students coming out of college. And one of the questions they asked this STEM group of college students was, could you see yourself in that profession? And which was obviously a yes for a large majority of those folks. But then the follow-up question was, do you see that profession, the STEM professions, as being inclusive? And the large majority said no. And so it's really crazy to think that, you know, a lot of people are going down this path, yet they're kind of knowing that they're entering a field that's already has a strong perception for being known for not being inclusive. And so I think that means that more work needs to be done. And typically, you know, when we're coming out of college and entering the workforce, there's a lot of focus on learning technical skills, right? And learning technologies and doing research. And so that really leaves like very few opportunities to talk about, you know, the ways that race and gender and all these intersectional identities that we're talking about shape our experiences, and they shape the science and our views on that science. And so I think those conversations are still overlooked, and really, you know, people have to ask themselves, like, the science and the work that we're doing, how's it going to be used? Who's it going to be used for? I mean, ultimately, science is developed to inform policies and decisions. And so those policies and decisions are going to affect, you know, certain demographics, certain groups of people differently. And so I think more discussion is needed. That's what's missing. And until people can get just as comfortable, you know, talking about, you know, I guess, sexuality and racism as easily as they can talk about, you know, sexism, then I think, you know, we've still got a long way to go. And I think it is important to keep having these conversations.
Absolutely. Yes, I think that's very important to keep in mind, that there's still a long way to go. I think sometimes it's easy for people to get caught up in, well, we've made so many improvements, but there's still a lot more to be done. So very, very good point. Thank you guys for sharing all of that. I think those are all really good points. And I think that's something that all of us should keep in mind going forward in our STEM fields. Okay, so next question. What are ways you think we can get women involved in STEM fields from a young age? And Vanessa, I'll start with you this time.
Sure. You know, I think just a few simple things like really maybe getting out there and talking to girls in their schools, like letting them see, you know, the other women come to the schools instead of just the dads for the career fairs that they have. Also, I think having more toys and books and hands-on nature-based learning is good to focus for the young girl audience. And I think, you know, even with your organization, I know you bring a lot of kids and there's a good focus on girls as well to have those experiences. So I think that's really important. And I think taking a chance on hiring young women and minorities is a good investment in the future of this field.
Yeah, definitely. Getting more people involved as we continue on helps develop ideas, especially like you said, young people. Not to, you know, pat myself on the back as a young employee. No, I'm just kidding. But I think it is important to have those new ideas coming through and, you know, developing programs, developing ideas. So, all right, Stephanie.
Okay, I just want to say that I can already tell we're going to have coffee sometime, ladies, because we can all talk about these, have a lot to talk about, and it's a joy. I'll try to not talk too long, but I want to read this quote that I found. There's this a documentary movie that's out, and it was on the Tribeca film list for 2020, which the event was canceled, so of course it's virtual, but it's called Picture a Scientist. And so I haven't seen it. I've watched the trailer and I'm thinking about hosting a virtual share, but there was a quote from it that says, if you don't have women, you've lost half of the best people. And that's true for all of it, right? Ages and races and sexuality and all of those things. Like why on earth would we do that? We have so many problems. We need all the people we can get. So, and not that we need any more justification for why we need diversity, but I think to get young kids involved, I really think everything that Vanessa just said, I totally agree with. We need all of those things. And I would go back even before that, and I would start with the parents and from birth. I mean, there are, you know, what is the big deal now? Gender reveal parties, you know, and even then you start with all pink or all blue, you know, and that's where the programming begins. And then when kids are born, you know, you give the girls dolls and you give the boys trucks, and it starts. That's when it starts. And I think it sounds like all of us, you know, we didn't get that memo, or maybe we just didn't buy into it for whatever reason. But if we're really going to change that, we need to encourage girls, you know, that they can do anything. And we need to, not only girls, but we need to encourage boys that they can do anything, you know, and that girls can do anything too. So it's very young. You know, if we wait until school, until they're 5 or 6 years old, that's almost too late. They've had 5 years of programming that girls are supposed to wear pink and stay in the kitchen. And you know, like Dr. Madkins said, and I love this, baking is science, you know, and art and fashion and all of those things. They're different forms of science, but they still are, and we can highlight all of those things. And you know, just start at a very, very young age. And one other thing, I hear a lot of women were almost trained to say this sort of thing, like, oh, math, that's not my thing, you know, that's so hard. And I hear some of my dearest friends and mothers literally say that to their daughters, you know, or to their sons, and say, oh, I'm not good at math, go ask your father. Or, you know, go ask Stephanie, she's good at math, but I'm not. And that sort of thing, I swear it's programming, you know, and if we stop saying that, and we believe that we're good in math, then we will be a little bit better at it, you know, or if we find the right network, you know, and switch to that growth mindset, like, okay, yeah, that's hard, but we can work on it and we can get better at it if we want to. You don't have to want to, not everybody has to, but it's just knowing that it's possible and encouraging that, I think is really, really important.
Yeah, and it's almost like a learned bias at some point.
Yeah.
To unlearn that at a certain point. And I think that's important saying really early on, we need to work on that, because it is harder to unlearn those biases as you get older. Definitely. Great, Dr. Madkins.
I can certainly echo everything that Vanessa and Stephanie have already said. I think you know, given my experience working with young students, I taught elementary school students for many years in Los Angeles. And little people are great, and they're intuitive. And so the messages that you give them implicitly and explicitly, they pick up on all of them. And so I think part of the work, as Stephanie has said, comes right when they're really young, before they go to school, or before you're sending them, wherever you're sending them for childcare, et cetera. Reiterating to them that they can do everything is possible for them, but also showing them a broad range of what that can look like. And so that comes through the kinds of books we have them reading, the kinds of programming they're watching on TV, or whatever streaming service you're using. We've been watching a lot of Amazon and Hulu lately. But each of those has like individual things, right, that have been created that are really, really useful, actually. And so showing both your boys and your girls and your children who haven't chosen a gender, if you're thinking about gender fluidity, right? Thinking about the kinds of messages that you're showing them in every single way, and showing them a diverse group of folks who can achieve. And that's the responsibility of everyone, not just folks of color. All families need to be doing this work, so that we also start to see and understand that anyone is capable, and start to unlearn some of the things that we, you know, I'm a Gen X, some of the things that we were taught, right? And so we're unlearning those things. I think that's what helps us to create more inclusive spaces and to get more girls interested in STEM from a very young age.
Yeah, I love that you said that, and you know, talking about pop culture too, and just what's out there, and really recognizing that there are biases in everything that is out there, and I think it's important to recognize those. Definitely. Right, awesome. Thank you guys. Let's see here. This question kind of reiterates what we've already been talking about, so we might be able to go through this one kind of quickly. But how do you think we create a culture that encourages and allows women to be successful in their fields, especially in dealing with implicit biases? So we kind of touched on this a little bit already, but we can go ahead and reiterate some other things. So Dr. Madkins, if you want to start us off on this one.
Sure, I was just looking too at the chat. Someone was talking about the McNair program. And so thinking about being successful, that was actually one of the things I was going to mention when we were talking about intersectionality earlier. I'm actually a McNair faculty advisor here at UT, and I work with lots of incredible, God, they're so smart and so motivated and so ambitious, far more than I was when I was their age, to be honest. But the McNair program is one way that we can really create a culture that allows women to be successful, particularly in STEM. I had the fortune of working with all young women last year as part of the McNair program. And they've gone on to great places like Berkeley, UNC Chapel Hill, some stayed here at UT Austin to pursue their graduate studies in STEM. And so the purpose of that program is to support mainly students who identify as first gen, who might come from low income backgrounds, or who are students of color, to support them in their undergraduate research experience so that they become better candidates to apply for graduate school. And then we support them as undergrads with all kinds of resources. So helping them apply to grad school, personal development, professional development, et cetera. And then they can also receive McNair funding at different institutions as they go on to pursue graduate careers. And so I think that's a great program that really encourages women to be who they are, but also to pursue their dreams, that shows them a particular pathway.
Wow, that's really cool. I've never heard of that program before. I think that's a fantastic resource, especially its continued support. That's awesome. Wow, I love that. Really cool. Okay. Vanessa.
Sure. I think we've talked a lot about how important it is and what we can do to drive young women into the sciences, into the STEM profession. And I think it's not only about driving them there and getting them there, but also keeping them there. So at some point when you are in the field and you start to progress and you start to grow in life and maybe you want to start a family, I think very often women of all backgrounds have to often feel like they're choosing between their career and the family. And I think it's particularly a stronger strain on women than it is on the men, even though we're living in this generation where men are willing and stepping up to the plate to share the parenting duties. But I often think that they're having to choose, and that's a big detriment for people in the science profession, women, to have to step back and to carry a heavier load on the child raising side of things. So I think if for some of us who do start off in the technical kind of field oriented tasks and jobs, ultimately you may end up finding yourself being pushed into a managerial type of role. And I think if for those who do end up moving into management, like, you should give it a lot of thought to seeing if you can foster a culture, a workplace that supports women who do find themselves, trying to balance a family and a career, and establish policies that make it more flexible and make it more possible for women to maybe leave and come back, or to continue contributing, and not to have to stay in these rigid norms and traditional kind of professional lanes. And so I really believe that in the workplace, managers, especially in the STEM field, should give it a lot of thought about encouraging men to take paternity leave and encouraging men to kind of support their wives and take time off, so that eventually in society that'll circle back around and their spouses, will have some pressure relieved off of them. And maybe if we all kind of do a little bit of that encouragement in each of our workplaces, you will start to see that change.
Yeah, and child raising is definitely a shared role if you are, in that sort of situation where it is important to involve like a paternity leave if that's necessary, and establish those, maternity and paternity leave options as a managerial position, in a managerial position, for sure. To give your workers the option to do that is very, very essential. Stephanie.
Yeah, this we mentioned the word implicit bias, and like you said, we had already been talking about it, but just even saying that word, we know what that means, but there's a lot of people that still don't even know what that means, So I think that might be step one, is making that a common, democratizing the understanding of that word, making sure that everybody knows what that means, and then figuring out what our own implicit biases are, because we all have them. And there's a really cool, Harvard has a program, I think that's the one that I'm familiar with. It's called Project Implicit. And there are all these different evaluations that you can do to see what your biases are. And, it doesn't mean you're good or bad that you have these biases. It's, it's your programming. It's just it's what you learn. But the first step is to know what they are, and then you can start to counteract those. And then, along the same lines as with younger children, we've got to start changing those from a very, very early age. And I also agree with, the program that Tia describes sounds really cool. And I agree with Vanessa about institutional changes. I was reading I was doing some searches last night. I heard about an academic program. They're starting to include in academic funding grants, grants for childcare, to encourage women to stay in school even after, or while they've are raising children. And then the term that I saw a couple of times is like an institutional report card for equity, and just how to help support women, because the numbers are astonishing. Dr. Madkins probably knows these better than I do, but the number of women getting degrees in STEM fields versus the number of women that are getting jobs in STEM fields, there's a big discrepancy, and more support in these lines would help equalize that.
Yeah, I think, those are really good points. And I would encourage everyone to take the Harvard, the study which you're talking about, which the implicit biases thing. I had to do that for college, and it was very, very interesting to see things that I had learned, which I didn't even realize that I had learned over time.
It's pretty fascinating, and they have so many subjects. You can, if anybody's interested, you can just Google Harvard Project Implicit, and you'll find it.
We can also put that in the chat on the Facebook live stream as well. Okay, so we are running short on time here. We have about 5 minutes left. So I'm going to switch over to audience questions. We'll go over those a little bit quickly. So it looks like we did cover the McNair question, which somebody asked, so awesome. And then there's another question which says, what do you look for in a workplace environment when evaluating its inclusivity? And I'll just open this up to anybody who would like to comment on that.
I'll mention something real quickly. When I look at different workplaces that I'm considering, I like to get a sense of if there's diversity in terms of age, like generational diversity. And I also like to see if there are other parents, working parents at the work organization, and minorities too. So for me personally, that's something that I notice. So I think organizations are doing a better job of bringing diversity on all levels. So that's just my personal experience.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. Anybody else want to comment on what you look for in a workplace environment when evaluating its inclusivity?
Yeah, I agree with what Vanessa said, looking for diversity across all of those fields. And nowadays, I think it's easier than ever, because I've really only had 2 jobs, the U.S. Geological Survey and Daniel B. Stevens Associates, over like 23 years. But back then I couldn't really evaluate them. LinkedIn wasn't an option. So of course, interviews and meeting people, but you can't, it's not always PC to say like, so do you have kids? How was it when you did maternity leave? And you can have those conversations sometimes, and like you said, Emily, when you're really young, when I first started at the USGS, I had no thoughts of childhood, or maternity leave or anything like that. I didn't have that foresight. But nowadays, LinkedIn is awesome for evaluating those, like Vanessa said, those things that you look for. You can see what a company posts and, do they support? Do they say it's International Women's Day? We support, and see what their political messages are, and then get an idea if that's a place you want to be.
Yeah, I feel like social media especially has given kind of an insight as to what people are really up to in their companies. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I would just add thinking about who's in leadership and the kinds of values and goals that the organization has says a lot. And then talking to people who are actually there, who are actually entrenched in the work, from people who have high status and low status in the organization. That tells you a lot about how they treat people and what if the environment will be inclusive or not, and if there's a particular subset of people that they mean to be inclusive or not.
Yes, leadership, very important. I'm glad you mentioned that, because it's something which kind of goes under the radar sometimes. Who's your CEO? Who's your CFO? Who's all of these people if you're working for an organization? Very important. Great. So we have one last audience question. What are your thoughts on the wage gap in STEM industries?
I defer to Dr. Madkins on this. I bet she knows the numbers better than I do. But it's real and it exists, right? And so, Scientific American and other things that I've read, it's definitely documentable. I don't know for certain, but I would love to hear what Dr. Madkins has to say.
I don't know the exact numbers, but we know that it exists for sure. As you've said, I think, with this reckoning that we're having globally right now about all the different ways that race, gender, socioeconomic status, et cetera, all intersect and affect our lived experiences. I think one thing I was really impressed with this summer was shut down STEM, shut down academia. I don't know if you all followed that hashtag. But Science Magazine, one of the most prolific journals, right? If we think about folks in STEM, was a huge supporter of this, and they raise these kinds of issues. And we know it still exists, but we also know that people who get into the STEM fields typically are making more money. These are high-paying professions in many ways. And so I think part of what we've been talking about today is how to get people to interested in those fields, but also to persist, and all of these things work together. And so thinking about how we can really decrease that wage gap is really important.
Yes, absolutely. And I think very important. I think it's one of those things where I know that women in every field are paid less than men by the dollar, but I think in the STEM field where it is male dominated, it's even more prevalent. So very important to think about that. Okay, well, it looks like we are about out of time. Does anybody have any final remarks, any last minute comments or anything like that?
I would just say, I was just going to tell the young women up and coming, if they're listening, that you have a lot to offer in terms of your perspectives that you bring and your backgrounds. And even if you get spoken over, dismissed at any point in your career, just take a breath and keep on participating, and that will take you places.
Yeah, that's awesome. I agree. I might share, there's a couple resources for kids or for everyone. A Mighty Girl website has a lot of good stuff. And then there's this other series, Goodnight Rebel Girls. And it has a lot of amazing stories about all sorts of women from around the world. It's a 2-part book. And what I think would be really awesome, like in 100 years, is when kids back then, this book isn't even called Rebel Girls. It's just called, Awesome Girls, because you don't have to be a rebel to get in this. So
yeah.
I love that. That's great.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll just say thank you to everyone for your time today, and to Emily and to Scott and to everyone at Colorado River Alliance for having us today, and to everyone who's watching the live stream. Just being mindful of the ways that you remember that your voice and the work that you do in STEM really does matter. So don't give up on yourself.
Yes, thank you all so much for taking the time out of your day on this rainy day, braving the thunder to join us here on Zoom. I'm really excited. I think this was a great discussion, and I am down to get coffee, Stephanie, like you said.
Yeah, I would love to meet up with y'all in person sometime and continue.
Yes, thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Yes, thank you. Quick little side note, Colorado River Alliance housekeeping stuff. Again, we have our next river reflections coming up in October. During our Lake Travis cleanup, we're going to be talking about pollution, so definitely tune in for that. This will also be available on Facebook. It's recorded, so you can always come back and watch it whenever you want. And then last but definitely not least, next week, next Thursday, we have our fundraising gala, and it's all virtual. So feel free to register for that and join in, bid on some items, go to any ceremonies. It's going to be a lot of fun. We've been working super hard on it. So definitely tune in for that as well. But yes, one last thank y'all. I appreciate it, and y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank you all so
Thank
much.
You too. Have a good one.
Bye.
And thanks to the Colorado River Alliance for doing so much to educate girls in STEM and boys.
Absolutely. We'll continue to use all of this conversation to continue our work with that. Bye, y'all.